Hi, I'm Laura Pazzaglia of Hip Cooking, and today we're going to master meats in the pressure cooker. I'll reveal 4 secrets to marvelous meats. Plus, I'll share my best tips while we make 2 recipes, a savory beef stew and an easy chicken cacciatore. Welcome to Pressure Cooking School! Getting tender, juicy, flavorful meats from the pressure cooker might seem like rocket science, but it's actually pretty simple. I'm going to share my 4 secrets to marvelous pressure cooker meats. The right cut of meat is essential. The pressure cooker is overkill for some cuts, while it will tame others into tender juiciness. Adding too much liquid will drown your meat recipe into a stock, while too little will run the pressure cooker dry and turn your meat into a lump of coal. Meat is easily overcooked in the pressure cooker, so choose the right cooking time to avoid squeezing out all the juice, moisture, and flavor. And finally, even if you followed all of the previous secrets and used the wrong opening method, you'll turn that tender perfection into a tasteless doorstop. How do I know these secrets will work? I've already done everything I'm going to tell you not to do. Let's get into the details. Pressure cooking is a very high temperature cooking method. So the reality is, by the time the cooker has reached pressure, some meats will already be overcooked. Let's take a look at a list of meats that are best for the pressure cooker and those tricky cuts. In the tricky cuts department, we've only got 1 cut of chicken that's really guaranteed to do badly, and those are skinless and or boneless chicken breasts. For pork, the tenderloin, top loin, and sirloin. And beef choice or select cuts really won't do well. For the best cuts, whole chicken. Wait a minute. You're not going to remember all this when you're shopping. There's an easier way to know which cuts of meats are best for pressure cooking and which are not. The tricky cuts are premium lean meats without bones or skin and little to no fat. They're the ones you chop up in little pieces and brown in a sauté pan, and they'd be ready in 5 minutes. And the best cuts are usually cheap fatty meats with bone, skin, and marbling from fat and tendons. Now, isn't that a little easier to remember? Let's take a look at some examples, and I'm going to give you some suggestions on how to use these tricky meats in the pressure cooker. Let's start with the chicken. So for chicken, anything with bone in and skin on will do fine, including a bone in and skin on chicken breast, which will be lubricated by the fat in the skin and insulated by the bones on the bottom of the breast. If all you've got is a boneless, skinless chicken breast, you can't just toss them in the pressure cooker and hope for the best. They'll turn out dry and stringy. Now, you can take advantage of this if you actually want them dry and stringy, and you can make my black bean chicken and rice burrito bowl, and the chicken will shred nicely in that recipe, and it will remain moist because it will be part of a chili. Another way to use chicken breasts in the pressure cooker is to roll them up with prosciutto and to fatten them up and physically make it thicker so it will take longer to cook, and make these saltimbocca, which you can find on the HIP website. For beef, I have a bit of an extreme example. I have a really thick, nervy, tough cut from the thigh of the cow, which would make a delicious stew. And then I have just a simple steak with no fat, no bone, no marbling. This steak will turn into a leather pancake if you try and pressure cook it. So again, if you roll it, if you stuff it, if you shred it, you can use it. But just by itself, it's not going to do well. And it's definitely not going to be a very good stew because it will overcook as the cooker's reaching pressure. So there's just no way to save that. And for the pork, I have what I believe to be the absolute best cuts for the pressure cooker, and those are ribs. Oh my God. You could steam them, you can boil them, you can braise them. They're going to come out delicious. You could do no wrong with pork ribs in the pressure cooker. Or any other kind of meat that is marbled with fat, that's got a bone in it. All those are going to do well in the pressure cooker. These lean pork cutlets, I wouldn't try pressure cooking them at all. Personally, I would just flatten them, bread them, and saute them till they brown on each side and serve it with a salad. These cuts actually come from a pork loin roast. And I also don't recommend doing a pork loin roast in a pressure cooker. As you can see, there's almost no fat or bones in this cut. So it'll really come out dry and crunchy, and really the only way to save it is with this recipe that I came up with, which is a Hasselback pork loin roast. And as you can see, we stuff in apples for moisture and coppa slices for fat and flavor, and actually that comes out really good. So I came up with that recipe, and you can find that on the website as well. So the first secret for marvelous meats is to use the right cut for the pressure cooker. Remember how earlier in the series I showed you how vegetables can contribute to the pressure cooking liquid because they're 80 to 95% water? And how this was important because there is little to no evaporation from the pressure cooker? Well, the same applies to meat. Fresh meat can be 45 to 70% water. Plus, if you add 10 to 15% more liquid for brined and frozen meats, you're going to end up with at least an additional cup of cooking liquid for each pound of meat that goes into the pressure cooker. And those extra cups of liquid are not just the difference between a braise and a soup. They're also the difference between flavorful and tasteless. So that's the second secret to marvelous meats in the pressure cooker. Tightly control the amount of liquid that goes into the pressure cooker in addition to the liquid-producing ingredients. Unfortunately, once you overcook a piece of meat in the pressure cooker, there's no going back. You'll be left with a pile of dry, crunchy, tasteless fibers, and no amount of additional pressure cooking is going to put that moisture back into the meat. In an earlier lesson, I discussed how ingredient size affects the cooking time. Well, that doesn't just apply to potatoes. It applies to meat too. Actually, it applies to everything in the pressure cooker. The same slab of beef, for example, can have different pressure cooking times based on how it is sliced, because the size dictates how quickly the heat will get to the center of the meat. A roast, for example, has the longest distance for heat to travel from the outside to the center of the meat. And that's about 45 minutes. If it's sliced into 1-inch stewing chunks, it will need 20 minutes, and broken up ground beef, only about 5. Don't worry, I've got you. The HIP website will list the cooking times for just about any cut of meat. And no matter how absurdly short the pressure cooking times sound, you should try it. You can always double check the results with the meat thermometer. And if the meat is not cooked to your liking, you can always pressure cook the meat more, but never less. And that's the third secret to marvelous meats. When I pressure cooked my first roast, I was so excited. I quickly opened the pressure cooker and I looked inside, and it was beautiful and moist and it smelled really good, and I couldn't wait for my family to see it. So I put it on a serving platter. I called them up to dinner, and I couldn't recognize what was on that serving platter. It had shrunk down to this brown, tasteless, hard thing that was not even really an enjoyable roast anymore. So that set me off to explore and find out why this would happen. So I searched and searched, and I found this little bit of knowledge about physics, about how the higher the temperature of a liquid, the faster it evaporates. So let me explain that a little bit and how I applied it to pressure cooking to reveal the fourth secret of marvelous pressure cooker meats. Let's start with a cold piece of meat out of the refrigerator. It does not have any significant evaporation because it is not being cooked. Then let's look at a piece of meat in the oven or in a pan. When it's cooling, it will have some evaporation, but it won't be a significant amount. A piece of meat that is pressure cooked but open with a slow pressure release, like my recommended natural pressure release, will evaporate slightly more moisture than the one that was conventionally cooked, but not a lot. And finally, let's see what happens to a pressure cooker roast which was pulled out of the pressure cooker as fast as possible using the quickest pressure release, such as normal pressure release. The meat is really, really hot, and a majority of the moisture begins evaporating away super quickly. And that's why for most recipes, I recommend using the natural pressure release. It gives the meat's juices enough time to lower the temperature and slow evaporation. On the flip side, there's a way to take advantage of this accelerated evaporation and use it for good. It won't work for steamed meats, and it won't work for braised meats, but it will work for boiling stew type recipes. That's where the meat is covered in cooking liquid, and the goal is to reduce it to concentrate the flavor. For these recipes, it's okay to use a faster pressure release. The liquid insulates the meat and keeps it from losing moisture, while the cooking liquid evaporates and concentrates the remaining flavor. So that's enough talking and illustrating now. Let's try it out and put everything we've learned to work. Okay, the first step is to preheat the pressure cooker. This takes about 5 minutes depending on the brand and strength of the heating element. Check the meat to see if it's browned. If you couldn't fit all the meat in one batch, scoot the existing meat aside and add the second batch. By the way, different sized pressure cookers have differently sized areas for browning. I'm using a 6-liter quart pressure cooker, and I can only fit about 3/4 of the meat. But when I tested this recipe in an 8-liter quart pressure cooker, you'll be able to do this all in one go. Okay, now that all the meat is browned on at least one side, let's add the wine and scrape the brown bits from the base of the cooker to incorporate them into the sauce. Time for the onion, garlic powder, salt, and bay leaf. Crush it lightly to encourage it to release more flavor. And don't do this if the leaf is dry. And finally, the cloves. By the way, I used to be a stickler about browning onions, and I found that's only important when they're a major component of the flavor, such as in a pasta sauce. In a strongly spiced stew that already has some brown ingredients, you can just toss in the onion without browning for a more delicate flavor. We're going to interrupt this regularly scheduled stew to add in some carrots. Adding them in the middle of the cooking process will prevent them from overcooking. First, let's open the cooker with the slow normal release. Oh, and by the way, you don't have to wait another 10 minutes to build pressure again. Almost everything inside is already boiling, so the cooker will reach pressure at a fraction of the time. Since there's already steam in the cooker, the lid will initially resist being twisted closed. And that's okay. I just press the lid down and wiggle it a bit until the locking mechanism drops down and lets you twist it closed again. Did you notice that I didn't thicken the stew before pressure cooking? This is the biggest difference between conventional and pressure cooking, besides the time savings, of course. Now that we're finished cooking, we can thicken the liquid. If we had done this at the beginning, the cooker wouldn't have been able to reach pressure. Thickeners make it difficult for the liquid to boil and generate the steam needed for pressure cooking. The liquid is already boiling, so all you have to do is mix it in. I just want to give a little body to the stew, but you can simmer it further to thicken it more. I like to serve this stew with skin-on mashed potatoes. It's the first recipe in this series without the cauliflower. We're going to make another stew type recipe here. It has a lot of similar elements from the previous recipe, but will yield a completely different result. Let's start with the olive oil. By the way, almost all electric pressure cookers will have a domed base where the oil runs down the sides. So do your best to pour the oil in the middle or coat the chicken pieces with it right before tossing them into the pressure cooker. This time, we want to brown the chicken on all sides to get the maximum flavor from the skin. This recipe uses a lot less than the usual 1.5 cups of liquid. That's because we're calculating all of the juice that will be released by the chicken. Do you see how it looks like someone snuck into your pressure cooker and added more liquid? That's the juice from the chicken that didn't evaporate during cooking. Isn't that amazing? The liquid appears to increase, but it's just the juice from the ingredients. So remember to be vigilant about how much liquid is added to a recipe from the start.